Finnish President Alexander Stubb has recently been flung into the limelight after he played a round of golf in Florida with Donald Trump. During this unofficial surprise visit, he urged the US president to set a Ukraine ceasefire deadline. Could this blossoming friendship have a positive impact on EU and US relations? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the Finnish president, Alexander Stubb, is Ukraine's staunchest advocate in the EU and in NATO. As the US President Donald Trump tries to move away from Europe, NATO and Ukraine, could Stubb help keep him on side? So, who is Alexander Stubb and what kind of leader is he?
Finnish President Alexander Stubb was thrust into the spotlight after pictures emerge of the European leader playing golf with US President Donald Trump. Stubb's unannounced visit comes at a time when Europe is bolstering its defenses in response to Washington's decision to cut military aid to Ukraine. Trump has hinted that the US will withdraw from NATO, but Stubb said he has heard no such talk during a recent visit to London School of Economics.
I am yet to hear from anyone serious inside the US administration, and I stress anyone serious in the US administration, saying that they're somehow withdrawing from NATO. What President Trump is doing right now is correct. He's putting pressure on European states to increase their defense expenditure, increase these capabilities, and take more responsibility for their own security.
As well as being a career politician, Alexander Stubb is also a respected academic. While in his spare time, he runs marathons and is a talented golfer who nearly turned professional. When Russia's war in Ukraine shook the continent, he was a key voice advocating for Finland's entry into NATO.
President Donald Trump is a seasoned negotiator, and he's driving this process forward right now. He's trying to stop the killing, ceasefire step one of that. And then after that, we all need to work together to achieve a just and lasting peace.
He believes Trump and Europe can work together to find peace in Ukraine. From golf greens to global talks, can Alexander Stubb be the European leader to improve European and US relations?
Well, let's meet our guests. They are all in Helsinki for this roundtable. Elisabet Lahti is a behavioural scientist and the author of Gentle Power, a revolution in how we think, lead and succeed using the Finnish art of sisu. Eoin McNamara, he's a research fellow at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. And Henri Vanhanen, he is foreign policy advisor to the National Coalition Party of Finland. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Elisabet, welcome back. Tell me, they say you should always play to your strengths, and it turns out Alexander Stubb is a very good golfer. So he flew off to America and he played with President Trump, and by all accounts, this was a genius move.
Yes, I would say so. And the little that I understand Stubb and his personal strength is that he's a very relatable, personable person. So I'm not surprised at all that he would use that personality of his also to kind of create those diplomatic relationships.
And Eoin, to you, I mean, we've never really seen this before, golf diplomacy. I know we see businessmen meeting and playing golf, but world leaders coming together and playing 18 holes, by all accounts, Trump was very impressed with Stubb.
Well, of course, we've seen this before in Finnish diplomacy. The sauna diplomacy is the more traditional, informal Finnish art of diplomacy. But golf is what Alexander Stubb utilized here. And of course, Alexander Stubb in his early years, late 1980s, early 1990s, went actually on a golf scholarship to Furman University. And he often would play this up. Furman University is in South Carolina. We don't know if Alexander Stubb came out of retirement from golf, because the story goes that he went as a golf scholar and exited Furman University, or graduated from Furman University as a political scientist, and he went on there as a kind of a scholar politician. But I suppose it's an indication that Plan A is not really working this time with Donald Trump. Plan A being that Trump is transactional and you play to his transactions. But we've seen to the tariffs that Trump is actually quite irrational in his protectionist trade policy, and transactional rhetoric doesn't work. So when Plan A doesn't work, you move to Plan B, and that's building up personal ties with the president. Both Alexander Stubb and Donald Trump like golf, and Alexander Stubb, of course, likes that and understands that Southern American mindset. So he's an Atlanticist president in more ways than one.
Henri, to you, I mean, this is probably one of the most important rounds of golf in Finnish history in recent years, isn't it? Trump and Stubb and this relationship, and the American president genuinely being impressed by your leader's prowess.
Well, certainly, as Eoin put it, Finland has usually had its own interesting means of diplomacy, one being a sauna, but this what I would call a driver diplomacy. But I think there's two reasons behind such an operation, if we can call it that. One is that Stubb is, when it comes to statecraft, he's not a rookie. We know that he's had a career as a member of the parliament, as a minister, prime minister, foreign minister, a member of the European Parliament, a professor. So he has had decades time to build a very comprehensive network of world leaders. And he's, I would say, one of his best traits is definitely his personal networks. And the other thing being is the realistic approach, in the sense that Finland and the United States have had a very sort of productive past 20, 30 years when it comes to building new ties after the Cold War, when Finland had basically no possibilities to have such a close relationship with the United States. Now we've been building, especially with defense and security, on the front lines. And I think, for example, these times that we are living right now, we're talking about Ukraine, Russia, European security, and Finland has a very keen national interest to try to maintain the US committed to European security. And if there are ways that the Finnish president can use his own personal statecraft and abilities and connect them with Finnish national interest in a way that benefits overall European security, I think he's in a very good position to do that.
Elisabet, my spies tell me that you have run with Alexander Stubb in Central Park in New York. Give us your impression of him as a man then. What were your takeaways?
Yes, this was a long time ago, 10 years ago, when he was visiting New York. And I was back then working for the Consulate General of Finland, and he invited anyone who wanted to join for this morning run in Central Park. And what I gather from there is that is the same kind of the personable, being an ordinary person, even though you are in a position of a lot of power, which I think is something that we need to cultivate more now, as we are in this time, really still as a collective coming out of a really dramatic season with what happened with the pandemic and what's happening with Ukraine, and that we're still in a time of disruption. And so this idea of leader as a healer, that's a beautiful concept by Nicholas Yanni. It's something that I see in Stubb, how I view him, is that he brings that, the heart and the humanity in how he leads. And I think that's something that will help us usher ourselves to a kind of a new paradigm from what we're right now experiencing with a lot of political and world leaders.
Eoin, talk to us about the importance of the relationship then between Finland and the United States, because the US is Finland's #1 trading partner. I mean, Stubb absolutely has to get this relationship right, doesn't he?
Yeah, most definitely. And the United States has become increasingly important for Finland as time has moved on. And Henri alluded to it. During the Cold War, Finland had to be very careful. We had this Finnish foreign policy, Finlandisering or Finlandization, where Finland tried to balance East and West. As Alexander Stubb has said himself, that now Finland, by not joining NATO up until a few years ago, Finland joined NATO in 2023. It was for staying non-aligned. It was pursuing what Alexander Stubb called an active stability policy. But of course, Stubb wants to bring or wants to evolve that now. And he talks about Finland pursuing a values-based realism outlook. And this very much strikes a chord with Atlanticism, with the role of the United States in Europe, the role of the United States as Europe's primary security guarantor and promoter of liberal democratic values on the continent. That's how it was seen when Alexander Stubb was elected as president last year. But of course, the joker in the pack is Donald Trump and some of the hardline protectionist policies he's been pursuing of late. That has upset the apple cart a little bit. But I think that idea of the president of Finland as a healer president, a president that can mediate across the Atlantic, I think from what we're discussing here, all the details about Alexander Stubb makes him a very, very important European leader to bridge that transatlantic gap that's opening up at the minute.
Henri, talk to me about Icebreakers, these incredible ships that Finland leads the world in designing and the construction of. Trump is very, very keen to get more of them and to get some orders in. So there will be a lot of business that will come between the two countries. But talk to me about these Icebreakers. Why do you think Trump wants them so much? Is this all about the Arctic and Greenland and, pushing north?
I think it's a good point. Everything is connected in the sense that if you look at the United States presence in the Arctic, they don't have permanent troops, for example. They have had rotational troops, for example, in Norway, but they also lack icebreaker capabilities. And what we see from Trump's talks on Greenland, for example, now we can argue about how correct his analysis is, but I think the sort of point is that the United States is looking more and more into the Arctic as a region of geopolitical contest, especially in relation to China and Russia. And if countries, allies like Finland can provide capabilities to the United States that it lacks itself, then we are used for allies. And I think this sort of reflects the broader approach that Finland has been taking towards the United States, in the sense that, for example, 2 years ago, we signed an agreement on 6G cooperation with the United States because we know that in the world you only have 3 companies providing top-level capabilities in that context. We have Ericsson in Sweden, Nokia in Finland, and Huawei in China. And then Finland, for example, is leading on quantum technology. Issues like these and Icebreakers are connected because they reflect how a smaller country can try to find ways to cooperate with great powers that try to stay on top of development when it comes to new capabilities. And I think the Arctic, especially as a region, we know that Russia has the dominating presence when it comes to military power. We know that China considers itself a near Arctic state. We know that as the ice is melting in the Arctic region, we know that China is looking for more trade presence, and the United States definitely does not want to see more Chinese presence and activities in these regions.
Elisabet, to you, how do Finns feel about Stubb then? Is he domestically very popular? How does your average Finn see Alexander Stubb?
Well, it's always hard to speak for the general mass. What I see from my point of view is what is really appreciated about Alexander is partially to do with this personable character and how he is a president that will not create a distance. You will see him running on the streets. Maybe you're going to be competing with him in an Ironman contest, who knows? So a person who's not just behind the tinted glasses, which means that you can actually approach him. And there's a little example that comes to my mind that touched my own heart some months ago. Stubb was participating in an event in Jyväskylä, and he was met with young protesters doing a demonstration because they had concerns about certain government policies. So instead of being a president and a leader who would walk past and ignore them, he actually went and approached the protesters to engage in a conversation. And they end up having a dialogue about all of this and shaking hands at the end. So I think this is super important when we are looking at this kind of new leadership, where we are trying to find a way how we come together as a wholesome and find some kind of unity as humans and not division.
That's a very refreshing point to hear, Eoin, isn't it? A leader who is prepared to go and stand and talk to people who have different points of view about policy. We see so much shouting and use of social media now from politicians. Stubbs seems to be quite connected.
Yeah, that's Finnish politics, and that's Finland for now. It's a very, you know, as an outsider, someone from Ireland, but I've lived in Finland for almost 4 years now. I've been studying Finnish foreign policy and security in the Baltic Sea region for many more, residing in neighbouring countries. That's Finnish politics, high trust society, where politicians have to be normal like everybody else, and then they can relate and they can build that trust. And Alexander Stubb is no different in that regard. I think if you see him on the street, he's very, very sharp in terms of his intellect. You know, he was a professor at the European University Institute in Florence before he became the president on a kind of a hiatus from politics. So he's very articulate. He's very bright, and I'm sure he's good company like that. If you meet him at a conference or in a cafe, he can engage in a dialogue.
Henri, to you, he's clearly a very ambitious man, Stubb. Do you think he wants to position himself as like a European envoy for Ukraine and build on that relationship with Trump's America as well?
Well, what we have seen in recent months is that due to Stubb's ability to present himself and his case and be very articulate about what his points are, and the fact that he's very well connected, I think he's in a very good position to take European leaders' role as not just as an envoy, but also a morale leader when it comes to support for Ukraine. He sort of is very in a good position to channel how Finns can relate to the sufferings of the Ukrainians, how we can have the empathy for them. And the fact that he's able to play golf with Trump, I think it's not just about ambition. It's also about how Finland could potentially punch above its weight with Stubb on the front. And I think he's doing a good job in terms of sort of keeping the eye on the ball. He says that we should not trust Russia. He keeps reminding President Trump that he told him that he should not trust Putin and Russia. I think he has access. He has access and he has a vision. And that's a good combination for any European leader these days.
And Elisabet, I mean, Finland has incredible history with Russia, very difficult history with Russia. You also share a border, the longest in Europe with Russia, 1,340 kilometers. So when Stubb talks about Russia as a Finn, he knows what he's talking about.
Yes, indeed he does. And I remember from the time of the presidential election, why I think he also garnered the majority of the votes, is that in addition to being a person who has the capability to unite, he also spoke a lot about this leadership, you know, and being a chief in this kind of a time when there are deep threats across the borders and across the global landscapes. So from my point of view, when he won, from all of my heart, I was just thinking that I wish you so much best, because it is one of the toughest jobs in the world right now, what he is doing, in addition to many other leaders who are carrying that same position.
Eoin, he gave a speech in London recently where he said that the world is now split into 3 regions: the global West, the global East, and the global South. And Stubb made the prediction that in the future, it will be the global South that pushes ahead and leads the way. What do you make of his reasoning behind that?
I think it's reasoning that does have a lot of foresight, I believe, because we look at the demographics in the global South, we look at the economic potential in the global South. Still some problems with governance across many global South regions, problems with weak states, fragile states, things like that. But in terms of economic potential and demographic potential, that is where a lot of the power is. But of major concern for the West is that have we already lost the global South, and can we claw back the support of the global South? We've seen this with the war in Ukraine. Many states in the global South have sympathy towards Russian propaganda or are ambivalent towards the Western defense of Ukraine as a state that was attacked in an unprovoked aggressive attack by Russia in 2024 that escalated in 2022. So a lot of Russian propaganda is being swallowed in the global South. Plus, China is a major player. If we look at Africa, parts of East Asia, Latin America, Central America, China is a very big economic player. And China, their approach is seen as a lot more simple and a lot more successful than the Western approach of old. Decolonization, Western hypocrisy, the Washington Consensus, that didn't really work in many parts of Africa, in Latin America, in Central America, in parts of East Asia. The Chinese go in, they invest, they extract their pound of flesh, no doubt, but they don't lecture about human rights. They don't lecture about authoritarianism, and there's stability and there's payback for many of these countries in the global South. So if the global South is to rise right now, it is a battle the West is losing, and this is something the West needs to respond to. So I think it's an important point that Alexander Stubb highlights there. We can get too Eurocentric now with what is going on in Ukraine and forget the bigger global picture. So I think he's reminding us not to forget the big picture in terms of global geostrategy.
Henri, Stubbs says what he wants for Finland is a dignified foreign policy. We've always thought of Finns as very dignified people. What does he mean as a dignified foreign policy for your country?
I think it reflects his line and sort of his sort of what he calls as the main idea of Finnish foreign policy. He says that it's values-based realism. And I think it stems from the idea that as a small country, Finland does not yield the same type of power as great powers in terms of international relations. It's that sometimes we have to find our way to find the best solution that serves our values and potentially advances them in the world. But at the same time, we don't always have the luxury to pick and choose the best option that's always in line with values and interests. And I think that's the challenge that also is connected to the idea of his vision about the global South, is that most people in the world today do not live in democracies. And unfortunately, this development has only been exceeding in the past 10, 15, 20 years. And he's preparing us mentally to the idea that at the same time, while we need to have a foreign and security policy that's countering the Russian threat in Europe and preparing to a European security where even we see clouds and fog of war, which is very unfortunate. But at the same time, we should also have a very global approach to the international relations these days. That because most of these countries that are going to be in the driver's seat in one way or another are countries in the global South. So how do we fix this gap between values and interests if they don't align? And I think he has had a very good sort of idea of this type of world, and he is actually writing a book as well that should be published in a year or two about so what he calls it this world disorder these days. And I think what we're talking about dignified foreign policy is trying to find a path that best sort of serves our values and also trying to connect them with our interests, but also preparing to the fact that we can't always have the luxury to execute this in the best possible way.
Elisabet, final point to you. Do you think Stubb can really influence Trump just because they have a shared love of golf?
That's very hard to say, as we know that there's always these surprises, and Trump doesn't really play with the kind of rule book that is based on this idea of adhering to agreements that have been made. So there's always something that can be surprising. So that's why the diplomacy and moving slowly and also yet determinedly is super important, but yet also very difficult. So this is really a time for all the leaders out there and us as the humans living inside of all of this that's happening to practice our own self-leadership and take really good care of ourselves and our sisu. It's a tough time right now.
Final point then, Eoin, same question to you. Can Stubb have any influence over Trump, do you think?
Yes, but Trump is a wild card and he's very, very unpredictable. The last time I was on you, we were talking about Ireland and Trump said he would do nothing to hurt Ireland, or he might have said the same thing to Alexander Stubb while they were out in the golf course. But of course, sanctions, tariffs against the European Union hurt Ireland and Finland and other EU member states. And Micheál Martin smiling in the Oval Office or Alexander Stubbs' round of golf with Trump didn't seem to move the dial in terms of the very negative perspective that Donald Trump has of the European Union. And that needs to change. And that's the challenge for European leaders like the Taoiseach and like Alexander Stubb.
Eoin, Henri and Elisabet, all of you in Helsinki today, thank you all so much for your insight on Finland's leader, Alexander Stubb. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.